My topic today is the grapes of Iberia, a study in diversity. And what I want to introduce to you is how plant material comes into the country and the tremendous wealth of new material we have in our program from both Spain and Portugal. My staff and I have to say a special thank you to Nancy Sweet, who has helped me tremendously with this program. We really couldn't have done it without her. We have been very much challenged by the number of synonyms that seem to exist for each Portuguese and Spanish cultivar, and some of the confusion that's associated with that. We started talking about the Tower of Babel and how, according to the chapter 11 in the book of Genesis, Babel, which is another word for Babylon, was an ingathering of humanity, and at that time humanity spoke only one language. God, wishing mankind to grow and fill the earth, confounded language amongst man and scattered mankind throughout the earth. Now, this gave us an idea about maybe what the ultimate solution to the profusion of synonyms that exist, especially for the Iberian grapes. After much consideration and consultation about what is the correct name for many of these cultivars, I think our best solution may come at a much, much, much higher pay grade than mine, and I think we might say that the only solution could come from up on the highest. I'm joking, but at the same time, for many of these cultivars, there is not a single correct name, and we need to remember that. Now, at Foundation Plant Services, formerly known as Foundation Plant Materials Service, we have certain policies about naming conventions, which we try to apply consistently to our cultivars. And we have tried to apply them systematically to our Iberian collection as well as our others. First, you should know that the historic UC Davis policy, with many years of history, was to keep the name that came with a selection on it, even if it was discovered to be incorrect. In my opinion, that caused us a lot of problems, but we have to remember that in those times, we did not have DNA fingerprinting. It was not easy for the experts of the world to move around and to correct the identification in collections, and the kind of easy collaboration we have now with talented ampelographers all around the world really didn't exist. And so things have changed a great deal. When I came on as director of Foundation Plant Services in 1994, we have begun the process of going through the collections. With the help of several laboratories I'll mention in a minute, we have been able to DNA ID as well as have master ampelographers visit the collections, and we, I think, are moving forward to a much more sanely named collection of grape cultivars or varieties. Now, we try to use the name of strongest historical evidence as the source of origin for a given grape cultivar at FPS, but there's a major exception to this. And that exception is that if a particular selection is proprietary, owned by contract or by patent or trademark by an individual, that individual may use the synonym of their option. And so that means that sometimes there are multiple synonyms for what we believe is the same cultivar origin, and there would be experts that would argue on both sides of that issue. We have many clones of some of these cultivars, so we actually have 85 Spanish selection and 82 Portuguese selection. At FPS, our selections, when they're in quarantine and are not available, we talk about them being in the pipeline. As soon as they passed all the disease tests that we perform, they become a provisional selection in our foundation and are available to nurseries and to growers and winemakers who want to source them. Once they not only have passed the disease tests, but also have been professionally identified, usually by both DNA and the observations, the visual observations of an expert, then they become a registered vine. Now, cultivar is the phrase for a grape that is used, cultivar is the name for a horticulturally distinct selection that is used by horticulturalists all over the world. The term variety is very old-fashioned, and I think the grape and wine folks are the last ones to hang on to it. You usually find people in the grape and wine industry talking about varieties, but increasingly you will see the word cultivar creep into use. And I like to read this quote from Richard Smart, which I think pretty much expresses the point of view of the grape and wine people, but not the view of the large majority of horticulturalists in the world. He says about cultivar that it's a term developed by professional botanists, as if that's some kind of a mark of shame, to mean a cultivated variety. In a strict sense, vine varieties are cultivars, but the term does not have a wide following outside the professional botanists and horticulturalists, except in South Africa, where it's widely and generally used. It has a major deficiency in that it has no adjectival form and therefore no counterpart to varietal. So those are Richard Smart's comments, and I think they probably would be reflected by quite a few people still in the grape and wine industry. So varietal or wine variety is perhaps more common in our line of work, but cultivar is in increasing use and is truly used by those professional botanists and horticulturalists. And so the horticulture guidelines are for the use of the word cultivar, actually. So Janice Robinson describes a variety and cultivar as a distinct type of vine within one species of the vine genus Vitis. The terms vine variety and grape variety can be used almost interchangeably. So when we talk about a variety, that's what we're talking about. A clone is a subset of a given variety or cultivar. And I like the Hortus III definition, a plant propagated by asexual or vegetative means, including divisions, buds, cuttings, layers, etc. Such methods are especially used with plants that do not come true to seed. That's certainly true of grapes. Clone is a horticultural rather than a taxonomic term. Now, if you think about it, for instance, Pinot Gris, Pinot Noir, we consider those different varieties. In fact, they are really clones of a single DNA fingerprint type, but the term variety allows for minor clonal differences that are horticulturally important to be called different varieties. So that's an important distinction. In the usage of the grape and wine industry, a variant of a variety or cultivar that is unique in some detectable way we call a clone. And clones have many different origins. A field selection, many people talk about as propagating a vineyard from a field selection. Theoretically, every single vine in that field may have clonal differences, and so each one would have to be treated separately. So if they come to FPS from a field selection, each vine is given a separate number, handled differently, tested separately, and allowed then to come through our program and eventually be released as an individual vine. When it comes to FPS, we call it a selection rather than a clone because we don't know that it's different than the other selections in our program. And so we don't call the material that we release clones except in a generic sense. And there's the issue of subclones, and the subclones issue is very important in terms of our therapy program at FPS because if we heat treat an individual plant or we put it through shoot tip culture for therapy, we give it a new selection number again. It's a subclone of the original plant, but we don't know for certain that performance differences aren't going to be there either because of the therapy treatment or because we've eliminated some viruses that could have an effect on the phenotype and performance of the particular vine. So this is our facility, Foundation Plant Services. We are the Center for Grape Importation for the United States. There are two other small programs, but way more than 90% of the grapes imported to the United States come through our facility. When we get a new grape selection, It could be a foreign import, a domestic selection, or a new variety. And it must go through disease testing. If it has virus, it needs to go through disease therapy and retesting until we're sure it's free of the viruses of concern, both to the federal government with our importation regulations and also to the state for our registration and certification program, where we can deliver materials that have been screened and properly identified to nurseries so that they can produce stock for growers. Now, foreign imports in particular, it's key to the improvements that we've made in our Iberian collection in recent years. The vines go to the foundation, they're provisional until we've gone through the professional identification step, and then they become registered vines that can go to nurseries or directly to growers. Many of our selections which we have sourced, we hope, will stem the temptation for informal importation or suitcase clones. It's very dangerous. It's dangerous to our entire industry when people choose to bring in great varieties and clones without going through quarantine. We know the horrors that the vine mealybug, that the glassy-winged sharpshooter, and that the light brown apple moth have brought to California viticulturalists. There are many other exotic pests and diseases in the old world that we don't want here in California that could damage us all. And it's very, very important. If people want to source grapevines, something that's not here in the United States, have them come to FPS or one of the other authorized importation centers. It's very, very important to all of us. Now, when we do therapy on a diseased vine, in the past, we did heat therapy, which involved taking the vine, growing it on a rootstock, and putting it in a heat chamber like this one at controlled temperature and day length at 37 degrees centigrade for weeks to months. And a lot of our old selections do have had heat treatment. We're not doing that very much anymore because the technology to do shoot tip culture, where we go in with a dissecting microscope and take a 0.5 millimeter or smaller shoot tip and regenerate a plant under sterile conditions in a growth chamber, that technology has gotten very robust, and we are now able to do it for plants and eliminate virus close to 100%. Now, why do we need to clean up these plants before we do evaluation? This is a summary of data taken in clonal trials from an article that Jim Wolpert published in 1995, Evaluation of Wine Grape Clones in Coastal California. When you look at clonal data, the variation between clones is as subtle or more subtle than the variation that can occur when a selection is infected with virus. We're talking about pruning weight, yield, cluster number, juice maturity, sugar, acidity. All of those things are profoundly influenced by the presence of virus in a plant selection. So you see here a cluster of grapes from a vine affected with grapevine family virus. It affects set, it affects cluster mortality, cluster morphology. It affects all these parameters of wine grape quality, and therefore if the vine is diseased, you really can't tell if it's a good clone or not. The same thing with leaf roll particularly, which delays fruit maturity, reduces color in the berries, and reduces sugar. How can you evaluate a clone until you've cleaned it up? So we do our best to bring things to a high standard of phytosanitary cleanliness and then provide them to you, the industry, for cleanup. You see here, Rupestra stem pitting, even a fairly mild virus, we think, causes all this pitting and grooving on St. George rootstock when it doesn't cause it on 5C or 3309. These are 2-year-old rootings. Again, performance is going to be affected by the presence of these even mild viruses. Some data on fruit. Bottom line, you get a reduction in the yield and a reduction in the probable alcohol, which is a measure of sugar. 2 Chardonnays, 2 Pinot Noir clones, each of them inoculated with leaf roll, and each of them profoundly affected by the virus, but in slightly different ways. Now, we have a great diversity of material available to the industry in the United States at Foundation Plant Material Service. We do not have the funds or the capacity to do clonal evaluation. So our strategy has been to partner as well as we can with people with good clonal programs in Europe, in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and viticulturalists, both in the public and private sector here in the United States, for help in, first of all, bringing in clones that have proven superior in other parts of the country, and second, evaluating them here after they've been through our program, testing and therapy, and we have them available to release to nurseries and growers and researchers as well. So we see our role as more of a librarian of this diversity of material than anything else. And where we have clonal evaluation information, we do our best to make it easy for you to find and to help you find it. But in many cases, when we release clones, we have not done the kind of lengthy clonal evaluation that's done in Europe. Our Portuguese selections, we have 35 cultivars, 85 different selections, of which 38 are registered and 18 are provisional. There are 26 new Portuguese selections in our pipeline. Our oldest FPS Portuguese selection were brought in by Dr. Harold Omo, who began importing port varieties from Portugal in 1939. He collected 29 of the current FPS selections from the Douro region in 1981 and 1984. He made two different collecting trips. Our more recent Portuguese collection, the additions to our collection, have come from our collaboration with one of our speakers today, George Bourne, and he brought in many new Portuguese and Spanish selections to our collection and has tremendous expertise in helping us negotiate Portuguese grape nomenclature. He has a beautiful book out, which unfortunately we do not yet have an English translation, but I hope that will come someday. You'll hear much more about his collections and the work he's done with them in just a few minutes. Our Spanish selections, we have 30 cultivars, 85 selections, of which 35 are registered, 18 are provisional, and 32 are in the pipeline, hopefully soon to be released. Our oldest Spanish selections are Valdepenas 03, and I must apologize for my pronunciation. People with good language skills have tried to coach me, but I can only apologize when I get the pronunciations wrong. We have a number of selections imported from Spain to California from the 1880s that went to the Foothill Experiment Station in Jackson when they were rediscovered in 1964 by Dr. Austin Goheen and brought into our collection. We have Mission in the collection, which is an ancient Spanish variety. It came to the New World via friars in the 16th century, reached California in 1778. And we have a picture here of the famous Winkler vine at UC Davis. And we actually have quite a number of Mission clones, which as far as I know have never proved to be very different. They're all different heat treatments of the Mission that entered the program in the 1950s and 60s. We have 23 Tempranillo clones. The oldest one, you see here pictures of it, in Earl Jones's vineyard, and he'll be talking more about his observations of its performance. In 2007, we developed an agreement with Jesus Yuste to bring in clones from his program for our public collection. We've had a very fruitful and valuable collaboration with him over the years, which has benefited, I hope, both our programs. And he will be telling you this morning about that collection and the kinds of standards they have for screening their materials. And then I just want to say a few words about professional identification of grape cultivars at Foundation Plant Services. This is an area where we've made so much progress in the last 15 years. It's very satisfying to be able to report to you that we are very close to being in a position where every one of the vines in our collection will be DNA ID'd. The technology has really brought our ability to make sure things are correctly identified far, far forward. We actually have a custom service at Foundation Plant Services, which is used by clients around the world, literally, for DNA ID of grapevine cultivars. And the manager of that program is Jerry Dangle. He's with us today, and his contact information is here, and all you need to do also is call the FPS main desk if you want more information about how to use this service. But it's a fabulous tool. Essentially, DNA-based identification works by comparing DNA profiles from the subject vines to validated reference profiles. Your database have to be valid and generated from correct voucher vines. And the way we have created our database is to partner where we can with people around the world so that we have multiple vouchers for important grape varieties. So essentially what you do is the markers are specific pieces of DNA. Labs look at the markers and share reference profiles using common technology. And this began in the 1990s with Dr. Carol Meredith's lab. She cooperated with the EU Grape Genetic Resources Working Group, and they agreed on a standard set of markers. And by harmonizing the markers that they used, then they were able to exchange data as well as physical markers. Now, marker technology is so powerful that you can actually run our marker pairs for two parents and the progeny, and you can determine parental relationships using marker systems. And there has been some fascinating research done looking at the parentage of Cabernet Sauvignon and other wine grape varieties. So what's the status of our Iberian cultivars here at Foundation Plant Services vis-a-vis DNA identification? Well, we have to give a lot of credit to Dr. Ed Stover, who was the curator and research leader of the USDA National Clonal Germplasm Repository here at Davis for far too short a time. Ed is now working in Florida, but when he was here, he was a real dynamo, and he did a lot of fabulous work, and he was a lot of fun to collaborate with. Ed made trips to Portugal and to Spain and developed collaboration with some of the leading scientists there working on identification of traditional varietals cultivars in those two countries. And they exchanged reference markers, which he brought back to Davis. And so we are able to use those in our DNA identification program. And some of the additional sources we have for confirmation of DNA profiles include from France, and then also from the USA, the National Clonal Repositories here at Davis, and also potentially at least the one in the Cornell University too. It would seem that France would be an odd source to get material to confirm Spanish and Portuguese varietals, but in fact the collection there is extremely well curated, and they have a very diverse and carefully examined and analyzed collection of grape cultivars from actually all over the world. So just a little bit of background on what we've been able to confirm of our Iberian selections. I'll go through this rather quickly, but you have a handout produced by Jerry Dangle with help from our other staff, and essentially it shows what Iberian varieties we have, and then how we've confirmed them, and where we have reference profiles from. And so with the case of ARN, the reference profiles come from both Spain and France, and our selections have been tested and confirmed and match the two sources that we have. So that gives you an idea of kind of how we try to make sure that things are correctly identified. And you have to keep in mind, every time a plant is created by taking cuttings from a vine, and those cuttings are shipped somewhere, and the package is unpacked, and the cuttings are rooted and turned into plants in a greenhouse or a field and then planted, there's always a chance of mix-up. It's the cross that people in my business and in the nursery business bear with everything they do. They have to be constantly conscious that a mix-up could occur. And oftentimes they do. And the thing that is wonderful about the technology now is we can check on it. We know our Tariga is right because it matches profiles from Portugal, Spain, France, and the clonal repository. Here, the Alvarinho, these varieties, everything has been tested and confirmed. Many more tested and confirmed. We have not yet been able to confirm this one because we haven't gotten to it yet, but we will very, very soon. Again, good standards from Portugal, from Spain, and from other collections, and we've gone through and DNA ID'd. Again, and two of our registered selections were named Matero of the Mourvedre. They came in under that name, and that's why we use both synonyms in our collection in some cases. Grenache Noir, we have 4 registered. We have good profiles from France. We have a few things in the pipeline here that we have not yet tested, but by the time they're registered, they will have been DNA tested and usually also confirmed by an ampelographer. Our Alvarinho has been confirmed. We haven't planted the Spanish and the Portuguese. We have 1 registered and 1 coming along to be registered soon. Now, Daryl mentioned this, but I cannot tell you how much flurry of phone calls and emails and questions we've gotten about the Australian mix-up, the Sauvignon Blanc Traminer that was recently discovered to be what the Australians have been labeling as Alvarinho. They received their material not from FPS. Many people have said that it was material that we mislabeled that was sent to Australia. The material came directly from Spain, and we have double-checked since this came up our clones, and they match the reference profiles from Spain and Portugal, and they do not match the reference profiles for Traminer. So we're quite sure that we've got ours right and don't see any problems there. We actually had one South African importer who wanted us to do a legal testimony that we had the correct variety, which was pretty entertaining. Now, a lot of the information we developed for this program today is new information that we will be posting soon on the National Grape Registry. There's cards for this registry in the lobby. I don't have time to tell you about it in detail today, but this registry has in-depth information about varieties and clones and the availability of different selections at nurseries all around the United States. Nancy Sweet, who is the manager of the registry, is going to be uploading the clonal information that she has teased out about these Iberian cultivars in preparation for our symposium, and it will be posted up on the website by the end of summer. And so I encourage you to take a look at that registry if you're not familiar with it. I have time for 1 or 2 questions, and I will be here all day if you have further questions. Jerry, did you hear the question?
The answer is yes.
The answer is...
All 8 markers are identical profile have to be identical to whatever the markers we look at. Yep.
How does the blue chip foundation lighting?
Nobody knows. Oh, sorry, I apologize. Let me repeat the question. The question was, how does the shoot tip culture get rid of viruses? And this is old technology. It was first used in the 1950s to free orchids and dahlias of virus, and it was subsequently discovered that it works with almost all horticultural crops. And it was thought, before the technology got more sophisticated, that what happened is you took a meristem dome with a couple of leaf primordia, and there's no differentiated vascular tissue there. And we thought that the virus moving in the vascular tissue perhaps was how it got into cells, and that by taking that dome, we were able to get tissue that had not yet been exposed to virus. However, recent molecular studies have shown there actually is virus in that piece when it's taken out and micrographs are done and probes are used. And so I'm very grateful that it works. It works robustly for a whole lot of different crops, and we really don't know how, and that's a study of a considerable, an area of considerable study by some molecular virologists, but we don't have the answer yet. Okay, I think, one more.
Collaboration with PPP to get the new names or nomenclature. And market the names, an example of Bastardo, Ronmes, well.
Yeah. TTB, as you know, has to approve names for wine bottles. And we would like to work with them extensively. They've been very receptive to working with them. The problem is I've never been able to attract industry funding for having a scholar sit down and do the documentation that needs to be done item by item. And I've actually put in grants trying to get funding for that, and I haven't been able to do that. So if you have any ideas about how we can make these two pieces work together more closely, I'd be very, very pleased. What usually happens is that a winemaker or a wine company that's interested in the varietal will give us a call, and we'll help provide them with all of the information that's necessary, including a letter from us about their DNA profiles. And then so far, all of the packages have been put together in the private sector. I think it would make a lot of sense for us to do it, but we simply don't have the resources.